In the darkest corner of the galaxy, where even starlight fears to venture, lies a weapon so ancient and terrible that entire civilizations have risen and fallen in its shadow. For 10,000 years, the greatest minds of 100 species have tried to awaken this sleeping giant. Quantum engineers, biomechanical savants, reality benders who could reshape matter with thought alone, all have failed. The weapon that could end wars, protect the innocent, or destroy everything, sits silent. But, sometimes, the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Sometimes, it takes the simplest soul with the most humble tools to accomplish what genius could not. Sometimes, all you need is a human with a welding torch, a stubborn streak, and absolutely no idea that what they're about to attempt is supposed to be impossible. This is the story of how Marcus Chen, a third-class maintenance welder from Earth, fixed the unfixable and changed the fate of every living being in the galaxy. And it all started with what everyone else thought was just another boring repair job. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his gloved hand, leaving a streak of soot across his dark skin. The maintenance bay of the Interstellar Research Station Kepler's dream hummed with the constant background noise of life support systems, but Marcus had long ago learned to tune it out. His attention was focused on the plasma conduit in front of him, its crystalline surface cracked in 3 places where micrometeorites had somehow penetrated the station's shields. Just another day in paradise, he muttered to himself, adjusting the settings on his welding torch. The tool was ancient by galactic standards, a simple plasma cutter with fusion capabilities that his grandfather might have recognized. While the rest of the galaxy had moved on to matter manipulators and quantum repair systems, humans still preferred their reliable, old-fashioned tools. The other species found it amusing, if not downright primitive. Marcus had heard the whispered conversations in the station's mess hall. The Zephyrians with their delicate, crystalline bodies thought human tools were brutish. The gas giant-dwelling Vorthons considered them laughably simple. Even the insectoid Klaxons, who respected human tenacity, thought their technology was hopelessly outdated. Marcus didn't care. His tools worked, and that was enough. The comm system crackled to life, startling him from his thoughts. "Chen, this is operations. We've got a priority assignment for you." Marcus set down his torch and activated his comm unit. "Go ahead, Ops. What's the situation?" "We need you in Bay 94. There's been an incident with the artifact." Marcus frowned. Bay 94 was in the restricted section of the station, where the research teams kept their most sensitive projects. As a maintenance worker, he wasn't supposed to know what went on there, but rumors had a way of spreading through the station's corridors like wildfire. Something big was stored in that section, something that had attracted scientists and researchers from across the galaxy. "What kind of incident?" Marcus asked. "The containment field generator took some damage during the last solar flare. The research team tried to repair it, but they can't get it stable. We need someone who can work on the primary power coupling." Marcus gathered his tools, slinging his equipment pack over his shoulder. "On my way." The journey to Bay 94 took him through corridors he rarely visited. The restricted section was quieter than the rest of the station, with thicker walls and more sophisticated security systems. Marcus passed through 3 checkpoints, each one scanning his biometrics and work orders with increasing scrutiny. When he finally reached Bay 94, he stopped short at the site before him. The bay was enormous, easily 10 times the size of any other space on the station. And, in its center, suspended in a shimmering containment field, was something that defied description. It was roughly cylindrical, about the size of a small building, but its surface seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Strange symbols pulsed along its length in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Impressive, isn't it?" said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Dr. Lyra Thessarian, the station's chief xenoarchaeologist. She was a Zephyrian, tall and elegant, with skin that looked like polished crystal and eyes that glowed with an inner light. Marcus had seen her around the station but never spoken to her directly. "What is it?" Marcus asked, unable to keep the awe out of his voice. "We call it the Harbinger, Dr. Thessarian said, her melodic voice carrying a note of reverence. "It's a weapon, we think. Or maybe a defensive system. The truth is, we're not entirely sure. What we do know is that it's older than any civilization we've encountered.
The materials it's made from don't appear in any database.
The energy readings are off the charts, but it's been completely dormant since we found it. Marcus nodded toward the containment field, which was flickering intermittently.
And the power coupling?
Over here, Dr. Thessarian led him to a control console surrounded by a tangle of cables and conduits. The coupling was damaged when the solar flare overloaded our systems. My team has been trying to repair it for hours, but nothing we do seems to work. Marcus examined the damage. The power coupling was a sophisticated piece of Vorthan technology, designed to channel massive amounts of energy through quantum-locked pathways. The solar flare had caused a feedback surge that had literally melted several of the quantum processors.
Have you tried bypassing the quantum locks? Marcus asked. Dr. Thessarian looked at him with surprise. You understand quantum engineering?
Not really, Marcus admitted.
But I understand power flow.
Energy wants to move from high potential to low potential.
Quantum locks are just fancy resistors.
The Zephyrian scientist's crystalline features shifted in what might have been a smile.
That's actually not a terrible analogy. But we can't bypass the locks without risking a catastrophic overload.
The Harbinger draws power constantly to maintain its stasis field.
If we lose containment. She didn't need to finish the sentence.
Marcus could see the worry in her glowing eyes.
What happens if the containment fails? He asked. We don't know, she admitted. The Harbinger has been dormant for millennia.
But the energy readings suggest that if it were to activate,
it could destroy the station?
It could destroy the system, Dr. Thessarian said quietly.
Maybe more.
Marcus studied the damaged coupling again.
The quantum processors were definitely fried, but the underlying power conduits looked intact.
He could bypass the processors entirely, but it would mean running raw power through the system without any of the sophisticated safety protocols.
I might have an idea, he said finally. But you're not going to like it. Dr. Thessarian raised what might have been an eyebrow. I'm listening.
I can bypass the quantum processors and run power directly through the conduits. It won't be as efficient as your fancy quantum systems, but it should provide stable power to the containment field.
That's...
Dr. Thessarian paused, her inner light flickering as she processed the suggestion.
That's incredibly dangerous. The power fluctuations alone could destabilize the Harbinger. Maybe, Marcus said. Or maybe not.
Your quantum systems are designed for efficiency and precision.
Sometimes what you need is brute force and reliability.
The Zephyrian scientist was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline form shimmering as she considered the options. Around them, the containment field continued to flicker, each fluctuation sending ripples of energy through the massive artifact at the center of the bay. The other research teams won't approve, she said finally.
They'll say it's too risky. Where are the other research teams? Marcus asked. In the observation deck, Dr.
Thessarian gestured toward a windowed enclosure overlooking the bay. They'd been monitoring the situation from there since the coupling failed. Marcus could see figures moving behind the reinforced transparasteel, representing dozens of species and scientific disciplines. Quantum engineers from Proxima Centauri, biomecanicists from the Andromeda colonies, energy specialists from the galactic core worlds.
The finest minds in known space, all staring helplessly at a problem they couldn't solve.
Maybe, Marcus said, unpacking his equipment, it's time to try something different. He began laying out his tools on the deck: plasma torch, fusion welder, power coupling adapters, and a collection of simple electronic components that any first-year engineering student would recognize. Compared to the sophisticated quantum processors scattered around the control console, his equipment looked positively ancient.
You're really going to try this? Dr. Thessarian asked.
Marcus smiled and pulled on his welding mask.
Doctor, I've been fixing things that other people said couldn't be fixed my whole life. My grandfather used to say that sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution.
He activated his torch and began cutting away the damaged quantum processors. The plasma beam sliced through the exotic materials as easily as it would cut through steel, sending showers of sparks across the deck. behind him, he could hear Dr. Thessarian speaking rapidly into her communicator, probably explaining the situation to her colleagues in the observation deck. As Marcus worked, he found himself thinking about his grandfather, who had been a maintenance engineer on one of Earth's first orbital stations. The old man had always insisted that fancy technology was fine until it broke down, and then, you needed someone who understood the basics.
Power is power, his grandfather had said. Doesn't matter if it's coming from a combustion engine or a fusion reactor. The principles are the same.
Marcus finished removing the damaged processors and began installing his bypass system. It was elegant in its simplicity, direct power coupling through redundant conduits, with manual switches for load balancing and simple resistors to prevent overload. No quantum locks, no exotic materials, just solid engineering principles that had been proven over centuries.
Chen, Dr. Thessarian said urgently. The containment field is destabilizing. We need power restored in the next few minutes or.
Almost done, Marcus said, making the final connections.
Cross your fingers, document.
He threw the main switch, and power flowed through his improvised system.
The containment field stopped flickering and settled into a steady, stable glow.
The massive artifact at the center of the base seemed to pulse once, as if acknowledging the restored power, and then returned to its dormant state. Marcus pulled off his welding mask and grinned.
There. Good as new.
Dr. Thessarian stared at the stable containment field, her crystalline features reflecting the artifact's eerie glow.
That's impossible. The power fluctuations should have. Should have what?
Marcus asked, beginning to pack up his tools. According to our calculations, your bypass system should be producing massive power fluctuations. The containment field should be unstable, possibly catastrophically so. But the readings are showing perfect stability.
Marcus shrugged. Sometimes the calculations are wrong.
From the observation deck came the sound of raised voices. Marcus looked up to see the assembled researchers in animated discussion, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds, lights, and pheromone releases. They were clearly agitated about something. They're saying it's not possible, Dr. Thessarian said, listening to her communicator.
The Vorthan quantum engineers are insisting that your bypass system violates several fundamental principles of energy transfer.
Maybe, Marcus said, shouldering his equipment pack. But it works. Dr. Thessarian studied him with her glowing eyes.
How did you know it would work?
Marcus paused at the bay entrance.
I didn't.
But sometimes you have to try something, even if everyone else says it's impossible. As he walked back through the corridors toward his quarters, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The artifact, the Harbinger, had seemed to respond to his repairs in a way that went beyond simple power restoration. For just a moment, when the power had first flowed through his bypass system, he could have sworn he felt something. A presence, maybe, or a sense of recognition. But that was impossible. The Harbinger had been dormant for millennia, and Marcus was just a maintenance welder with a simple set of tools. Still, as he reached his quarters and began cleaning his equipment, Marcus found himself thinking about the artifact's strange, shifting surface and the symbols that pulsed along its length. And, somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that this was just the beginning. In Bay 94, Dr. Thessarian remained at her post, monitoring the containment field and the artifact it held. The power readings were not just stable, they were perfect. Too perfect, perhaps, for a system cobbled together from spare parts and basic engineering principles. She made a note in her research log: human maintenance worker Marcus Chen has successfully stabilized the Harbinger's containment system using primitive but effective power coupling technology.
Method defies current understanding of quantum energy dynamics. Recommend further study.
What she didn't note, because her instruments weren't sophisticated enough to detect it, was that the Harbinger itself had changed. The alien symbols along its surface were pulsing in a new pattern, one that hadn't been seen in 10,000 years. Deep within its exotic matter core, ancient systems were stirring to life, responding to something they had never encountered before: the touch of human hands and the simple, honest engineering of a species that solved problems not with elegant theory, but with practical determination. The Harbinger was waking up, and Marcus Chen had been the one to flip the switch. 3 days after Marcus had fixed the containment field, everything started going wrong. It began with small things that most people dismissed as coincidence.
The station's automated systems began running with unprecedented efficiency. Power consumption dropped by 15% while performance increased across all departments. The hydroponics bay reported crop yields that exceeded theoretical maximums. Even the coffee in the mess hall tasted better, though no one could explain why. Marcus noticed these changes but didn't connect them to his repair work until Dr. Thessarian found him in Maintenance Bay 7, where he was replacing a faulty atmospheric recycler. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Marcus looked up from his work, noting the tension in her crystalline features. "Problem with the containment field?"
"The opposite," Dr. Thessarian said.
"Everything is working too well.
The Harbinger's power consumption has increased by 300%, but our systems are somehow handling the load without any strain. It's as if the entire station is being optimized."
Marcus set down his tools. "Optimized how?"
"That's what we're trying to figure out. The quantum engineers think the Harbinger is interfacing with our systems somehow.
The biomechanicists believe it's analyzing our technology.
The energy specialists are convinced it's preparing to do something catastrophic."
"What do you think?" Marcus asked. Dr. Thessarian's inner light flickered uncertainly.
"I think it's learning. And I think your repair work triggered something." She led him back to Bay 94, where Marcus saw that the research team had doubled in size. Representatives from a dozen species crowded the observation deck, their equipment creating a maze of cables and monitoring devices.
The bay itself hummed with barely contained energy, and the Harbinger seemed more active than before.
The symbols along its surface pulsed in complex patterns, and its liquid metal skin rippled like water in a gentle breeze. "The changes started exactly 72 minutes after you restored power," Dr. Thessarian explained as they walked. "At first, we thought it was just the system stabilizing after the repairs. But the energy signatures keep evolving. It's like watching something wake up after a very long sleep." They entered the observation deck, where Marcus was immediately surrounded by alien researchers. A Vorthan gas being spoke to him through a translation device, its words emerging as a series of musical tones. A Klaxon engineer clicked and chittered excitedly while its cybernetic implants translated the sounds into galactic standard. Even the normally aloof ethereals, beings of pure energy who rarely interacted with physical species, had sent a representative. "They all want to know how you did it," Dr. Thessarian said. "Your bypass system is somehow interfacing with the Harbinger in ways that our quantum technology never could." "I just ran power through some cables," Marcus said, feeling overwhelmed by the attention.
"There's nothing special about it."
A tall, silver-skinned humanoid stepped forward. This was Dr. Kane Vex, a Proximan quantum engineer whose reputation preceded him across the galaxy. "Nothing special," he said, his voice carrying the precise diction of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. "Your primitive coupling system is somehow creating a quantum resonance cascade with technology that predates our civilization by millions of years. That is decidedly not nothing special."
Marcus looked through the observation window at the Harbinger. The artifact's surface was definitely more active now, with waves of energy flowing along its length in hypnotic patterns. Maybe the primitive approach is exactly what it needed.
Dr. Vex's silver features twisted into what might have been a condescending smile. "I hardly think that cobbled-together human technology could succeed where advanced quantum engineering has failed. And yet here we are, Dr.
Thessarian interjected smoothly.
"The Harbinger is more active now than it's been in the 3 years since we discovered it."
"Correlation does not imply causation," Dr. Vex said. "The timing could be coincidental."
Marcus studied the Harbinger through the transparisteel, noting how the energy patterns seemed to pulse in rhythm with the station's power grid. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, "Sometimes the old ways work because they're honest. No tricks, no shortcuts, just reliable engineering." "Dr. Vex," Marcus said finally. "What do your quantum scanners tell you about the artifact's internal structure?" The Proximan consulted a handheld device covered in holographic displays.
"The internal matrix is composed of exotic matter held in quantum superposition.
The energy flows follow non-Euclidean geometries that our models can barely comprehend.
It's incredibly sophisticated. But what does it do? Marcus asked.
Dr. Vex paused, his silver skin flickering with embarrassment.
We're not entirely certain.
The quantum signatures suggested some kind of weapon system, but the energy patterns don't match any known defensive or offensive technology.
Marcus nodded and walked to the control console where his bypass system was still running. The simple human components looked absurdly primitive next to the sophisticated alien technology surrounding them. Maybe you're overcomplicating it. Overcomplicating? Dr. Vex's voice rose an octave. This artifact represents technology beyond our current understanding. How could we possibly overcomplicate our approach?
Instead of answering, Marcus began examining the power flow readings on his improvised system. The patterns were subtle, but they were there, tiny variations in current and voltage that seemed to correspond with the Harbinger's energy pulses.
Dr. Thessarian, he said, do you have historical data on the Harbinger's activity before the repair?
The Zephyrian scientist activated a holographic display showing weeks of monitoring data.
These are the readings from the past month. As you can see, the artifact was completely dormant until 3 days ago, Marcus finished.
He studied the data, comparing it with the current readings from his bypass system.
Look at this. The Harbinger isn't just drawing power from the station. It's communicating. Communicating with what? Dr. Thessarian asked.
Marcus pointed to his simple voltage meters.
With my repair system. These fluctuations aren't random, they're patterns. The artifact is trying to tell us something. Dr. Vex scoffed. You're suggesting that this ancient weapon is communicating through fluctuations in your primitive power coupling? That's absurd. Is it? Marcus asked.
You said yourself that the Harbinger predates our civilizations by millions of years.
What if it's so old that it only understands simple, direct communication? What if all your quantum sophistication is just noise to it? The observation deck fell silent as the implications sank in. An artifact older than recorded history, trying to communicate through the most basic principles of electrical engineering. It was either brilliant or completely insane.
There's one way to find out, Marcus said, reaching for the manual controls of his bypass system.
Wait, Dr. Vex said urgently.
If you're wrong, you could destabilize the entire containment field. Marcus paused with his hand on the control switch.
And if I'm right, we might finally understand what this thing is trying to tell us. Dr. Thessarian moved to stand beside him. What do you need?
Just watch the Harbinger, Marcus said.
If I'm right about the communication theory, it should respond to deliberate changes in power flow.
He began adjusting the bypass system, creating deliberate patterns in the power delivery. First, he pulsed the power 3 times in quick succession.
Then, 5 times. Then, 8 times.
The Harbinger's response was immediate and unmistakable. The energy patterns along its surface shifted to match Marcus's pulses exactly, 3 flashes, then 5, then 8. The mathematical sequence continued as Marcus sent 13 pulses, then 21. The Fibonacci sequence, Dr. Thessarian whispered.
It understands mathematical concepts.
Marcus nodded and switched to a different pattern, the first 10 prime numbers.
Again, the Harbinger responded perfectly, its surface lighting up in the exact sequence Marcus had transmitted. Dr.
Vex stared at his quantum scanners in disbelief.
This is impossible. The communication protocols we've been trying to establish for 3 years, and you achieve contact through basic electrical signals?
Maybe, Marcus said, continuing his communication attempts, you were trying to speak a language it doesn't understand. He began transmitting more complex patterns, geometric sequences, mathematical constants, even simple binary code. Each time, the Harbinger responded with perfect accuracy. But it was when Marcus tried something different that the Real breakthrough occurred. Instead of mathematical concepts, he began transmitting patterns based on his work experience, power frequencies for different types of equipment, voltage patterns for various repair procedures, even the rhythm of his welding torch firing sequence.
The Harbinger's response was dramatic and immediate.
The entire artifact pulsed with brilliant energy, and new symbols appeared along its surface, symbols that somehow seemed familiar, even though Marcus had never seen them before.
"What did you do?"
Dr. Thessarian asked, her voice filled with awe. "I told it about work," Marcus said simply. "About fixing things and building things and making things run properly." The symbols on the Harbinger's surface began to move, flowing like liquid text across the artifact's skin.
As they moved, the station's translation systems began to activate, attempting to decode the alien writing.
"It's responding," Dr. Vex said, his quantum scanners recording frantically. "The artifact is generating coherent linguistic patterns."
"But the language doesn't match anything in our databases."
Marcus watched the flowing symbols with growing recognition. They weren't just random alien text, they were instructions.
Repair procedures. Technical specifications.
The Harbinger wasn't just a weapon or a defensive system. It was a tool, created by a civilization so advanced that their technology had become indistinguishable from magic to lesser species. "Dr. Thessarian," he said urgently, "I need access to the station's industrial fabrication systems."
"Why?" she asked. "Because," Marcus said, still watching the flowing symbols, "I think the Harbinger wants me to build something."
The symbols pulsed brighter, as if responding to his words. Around the observation deck, representatives from a dozen species stared in amazement as the ancient artifact continued its communication with a simple human maintenance worker. Dr. Vex's quantum scanners were registering energy patterns that shouldn't have been possible. The biomechanicists were detecting structural changes in the artifact's exterior. The energy specialists were recording power flows that defied known physics. But Marcus only had eyes for the flowing symbols, which were coalescing into recognizable patterns.
Blueprints. Schematics. Instructions for building something that would change everything. "The fabrication systems are restricted," Dr. Thessarian said. "I'd need authorization from the station commander."
"Then, get it," Marcus said. "Because I think we're about to discover what the Harbinger really is. And why it's been waiting so long for someone to understand its language." The ancient artifact pulsed again, and the symbols flowed faster across its surface.
Somewhere in the depths of space, automated systems that had been dormant for millennia began to stir.
The Harbinger had found its engineer, and, after eons of silence, it was finally ready to reveal its true purpose. But, first, it needed Marcus to build the key that would unlock its secrets. A key that could only be forged by human hands, using human tools, and human understanding of how to make things work when everything else had failed. The fabrication bay hummed with activity as Marcus studied the holographic blueprints projected above the central work platform. Station Commander Raylavas, a stern Martian woman with cybernetic implants covering half her face, stood beside him with her arms crossed. "Let me understand this correctly, Chan," she said, her mechanical eye whirring as it focused on the complex schematics. "You want to use our industrial fabricators to build a device based on instructions from an alien artifact that we don't understand, using materials that don't exist in our databases, for a purpose that nobody can explain?" Marcus nodded, still studying the blueprints. The Harbinger's instructions were incredibly detailed, but they specified components made from materials that human science had never encountered. Exotic matter composites, quantum-locked metals, even substances that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "That's about the size of it, Commander," he said. "And you think this is a good idea because—" Marcus pointed to a section of the blueprint that showed power distribution patterns. "Because I recognize some of these engineering principles. The basic concepts are solid, even if the materials are beyond us." Dr. Thessarian materialized beside them, her crystalline form shimmering with excitement. "Commander, the linguistic analysis is complete. The Harbinger is definitely providing construction instructions, but there's something else. The artifact appears to be teaching." "Teaching what?" Commander Voss asked. "Advanced manufacturing techniques. Material science principles that are centuries ahead of anything in our databases. It's as if the artifact recognizes our technological limitations and is providing workarounds." Marcus had been thinking the same thing. The blueprints showed two sets of specifications, one using the exotic materials that the original builders had access to, and another using substitutes that could be manufactured with current technology. It was like having a master craftsman explain how to build a fusion reactor using spare parts and ingenuity. The material substitutions are fascinating, Dr. Vex interjected, joining the group around the holographic display. His earlier skepticism had been replaced by scientific curiosity.
Standard titanium steel composites enhanced with quantum-treated silicon matrices. Carbon nanotube weaving reinforced with synthetic diamond lattices.
It's primitive compared to the original specifications, but theoretically functional.
Theoretically, Commander Voss emphasized. What happens if your theory is wrong?
Then, we've wasted some materials and fabrication time, Marcus said.
But, if it's right.
If it's right, Dr. Thessarian said, we might finally understand what the Harbinger is and why it's here. Commander Voss was quiet for a long moment, her human eye studying the blueprints while her cybernetic implant ran probability calculations.
Finally, she nodded. You have 12 hours and access to Fabrication Bay 3.
But I want constant monitoring and the ability to shut down the project immediately if anything goes wrong. Understood, Marcus said, already moving toward the fabrication controls.
The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity.
The station's industrial fabricators worked around the clock, creating components that pushed the limits of human engineering. Marcus found himself at the center of an international effort, with specialists from across the galaxy contributing their expertise to the construction process. The Klaxon metallurgists provided techniques for creating quantum-treated silicon matrices.
The Vorthan gas beings offered insights into multi-dimensional material properties.
Even the aloof ethereals contributed knowledge about energy manipulation on a subatomic level. But it was Marcus who did the actual building, his simple tools somehow perfectly suited for the delicate work of assembling components that existed at the intersection of multiple realities. His welding torch could bond materials that sophisticated quantum fusion systems couldn't touch. His basic electronic components interfaced seamlessly with exotic matter processors.
This shouldn't work, Dr. Vex muttered, watching Marcus solder a connection between a standard copper circuit and a quantum-locked power conduit.
The energy differentials alone should cause a cascade failure. But it does work, Dr. Thessarian observed, monitoring the energy flows through her sophisticated sensors. The human approach creates harmonic resonances that our quantum systems miss entirely. Marcus paused in his work, wiping sweat from his forehead.
The device taking shape on the fabrication platform was unlike anything he had ever seen.
It was roughly spherical, about the size of a basketball, with a surface that seemed to shift between solid metal and flowing energy. Conduits and circuits traced patterns across its exterior, connecting to a central core that pulsed with soft light. What do you think it does? He asked Dr. Thessarian. The Zephyrian scientist consulted her readings.
Based on the energy patterns, it appears to be some kind of interface device. But, an interface to what, I cannot say.
Marcus was about to respond when alarms began blaring throughout the fabrication bay. Emergency lights bathed the room in red as Commander Voss's voice echoed through the comm system.
All personnel to emergency stations. We have multiple contacts approaching the station at high velocity. Unknown configuration, but they're big.
Through the bay's observation windows, Marcus could see ships emerging from hyperspace around Kepler's Dream. They were massive vessels, easily 10 times the size of the research station, with hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it.
Their design was angular and predatory, clearly built for war.
Harvester fleet, Dr. Vex said, his silver skin paling to an almost white shade. I've seen ships like these in the restricted databases.
They're from the Void Syndicate.
Marcus had heard of the Void Syndicate, though he'd hoped never to encounter them.
They were raiders and scavengers who traveled the galaxy's edge, collecting technology and enslaving entire populations.
Their ships were powered by stolen energy cores, and their weapons could crack planets.
How many? Dr. Thessarian asked.
15 ships in the first wave. Commander Voss reported over the comm long-range sensors are detecting at least 30 more approaching.
They've got us surrounded.
Marcus looked at the device he'd been building, then at the Harbinger visible through the bay's windows. The ancient artifact was pulsing more rapidly now, its energy patterns matching the approaching threat.
It knew, he said suddenly.
The Harbinger knew they were coming.
What? Dr. Thessarian looked at him with confusion.
Think about it, Marcus said, his hands already moving to complete the device's final connections.
An ancient weapon system that's been dormant for millennia suddenly becomes active just before the most dangerous raiders in the galaxy show up? That's not a coincidence. The station shuddered as the first harvester ships opened fire.
Their energy weapons struck the shields with tremendous force, causing power fluctuations throughout Kepler's dream. In the distance, Marcus could see escape pods beginning to launch from the station's civilian sections. The shields won't hold for long, Dr. Vex said, monitoring his scanners.
Those ships are equipped with quantum disruptors.
They can punch through our defenses within minutes. Marcus made the final connection on his device and stepped back.
It was complete, pulsing with the same rhythm as the Harbinger.
But he still didn't know what it was supposed to do.
How do we activate it? Dr. Thessarian asked.
Marcus studied the device, looking for some kind of control interface. There were no buttons, no switches, no obvious way to operate it.
Just smooth surfaces that seemed to flow like liquid metal. Maybe, he said, remembering his earlier communication with the Harbinger, it responds to touch.
He reached out and placed his hands on the device's surface. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Energy surged through his body, not painful but incredibly intense. Images flashed through his mind, star systems, civilizations, technologies beyond imagination. And, through it all, a presence that felt ancient and patient and incredibly wise.
The device pulsed brighter, and, suddenly, Marcus understood. This wasn't just an interface, it was a key.
A key that would unlock the Harbinger's true potential. But, using it would require more than just technical knowledge. It would require trust, courage, and the willingness to take responsibility for consequences he couldn't fully comprehend. Outside, the Harvester fleet continued its assault. The station's shields flickered and failed, and the first enemy boarding parties began cutting through the hull.
Time was running out for everyone aboard Kepler's Dream.
Marcus looked at his companions, Dr. Thessarian with her crystalline elegance, Dr. Vex with his quantum calculations, and all the other researchers who had dedicated their lives to understanding the universe's mysteries. They were good people, brilliant in their own ways, but they were about to be enslaved or killed by raiders who saw knowledge as just another commodity to be harvested. Whatever you're going to do, Dr. Thessarian said urgently, do it now. Marcus tightened his grip on the device and felt its energy respond to his determination. The Harbinger had been waiting for someone who understood not just how to fix things, but why things needed to be fixed. It had been waiting for someone who saw technology not as an end in itself, but as a tool to protect and preserve what mattered most. Hold on to something, he told his companions, and activated the key. The device flared with brilliant light, and the fabrication bay filled with energy that seemed to come from outside normal spacetime. Through the windows, they could see the Harbinger responding to the activation signal, its ancient systems coming online for the first time in eons. But, even as the artifact awakened, Marcus realized that he had only begun to understand its true nature. The Harbinger wasn't just a weapon, it was something far more complex and far more dangerous. And he had just agreed to become its operator, with all the power and responsibility that entailed. The battle for Kepler's Dream was about to become something much larger than anyone had anticipated. And Marcus Chen, the simple maintenance welder from Earth, was about to discover that sometimes fixing things meant breaking everything else first. The energy that flowed through Marcus wasn't like anything he'd ever experienced. It wasn't electricity or heat or any form of power he understood. It was knowledge itself, raw and overwhelming, flooding his consciousness with the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe billions of years ago. He saw their history in flashes of brilliant clarity. The architects, as they called themselves, had been the first species to achieve true technological transcendence. They had built wonders that spanned galaxies, created life where none existed, and developed weapons capable of reshaping reality itself. The Harbinger was one of their greatest achievements, not just a weapon, but a guardian system designed to protect younger civilizations from threats they couldn't yet comprehend. But the architects had learned a terrible truth: ultimate power corrupted even the most well-intentioned beings. They had seen other ancient civilizations fall to their own technological might, becoming destroyers rather than protectors. So they had built safeguards into the Harbinger, ensuring that it could only be activated by a species that understood the value of simple, honest work.
Shun.
Commander Voss's voice cut through the data stream flowing through Marcus's mind.
What's happening to you?
Marcus opened his eyes, realizing that he was floating several feet above the fabrication bay floor, surrounded by tendrils of energy that connected him to the device he'd built. Through the bay's windows, he could see the Harbinger transforming.
Its liquid metal surface was unfolding like an enormous flower, revealing internal structures that defied geometric logic.
The harvester ships are changing course, Dr. Thessarian reported, her voice tight with tension. They're focusing all their firepower on the Harbinger.
Marcus understood why.
The ancient artifact was radiating power on a scale that made their stolen energy cores look like candle flames. The Void Syndicate had spent centuries collecting advanced technology, but they had never encountered anything like this.
Warning, the station's AI announced. Multiple quantum singularities detected. Spatial distortions increasing. Recommend immediate evacuation. Can we stop it? Commander Voss asked Marcus.
Marcus felt the Harbinger's consciousness touching his own, ancient and patient and utterly inhuman in its perspective. It had been dormant for so long that entire civilizations had risen and fallen in the time it took the artifact to complete a single thought. But now it was awake, and it was evaluating the threat to this corner of the galaxy. It's making decisions, Marcus said, his voice strange even to his own ears. The Harbinger is analyzing the harvester fleet, determining the appropriate response level.
Response level?
Dr. Vex asked, his quantum scanners registering energy patterns that shouldn't have been possible. Through his connection with the artifact, Marcus could feel its calculations. The Void Syndicate represented a clear threat to developing civilizations.
They had destroyed hundreds of worlds, enslaved billions of beings, and shown no inclination toward peaceful coexistence.
The Harbinger's purpose was to eliminate such threats before they could spread further. But the ancient system was also evaluating Marcus himself, testing his judgment and his understanding of the consequences of power. The architects had built the Harbinger to be more than just a weapon, they had made it a judge, capable of determining not just what could be destroyed, but what should be destroyed. The harvester ships are attempting to retreat, Dr. Thessarian reported.
But something is preventing them from entering hyperspace.
Marcus could feel the Harbinger's influence extending through local spacetime, creating distortions that made faster-than-light travel impossible. The raiders were trapped, forced to face the consequences of their actions for the first time in their violent careers.
Incoming transmission from the Harvester fleet, Commander Voss announced. They're requesting negotiation.
The voice that came through the comm system was harsh and mechanical, filtered through translation systems and threat recognition protocols.
Unknown entity, we withdraw our claim to this system. Allow us to depart, and there will be no further conflict. Marcus felt the Harbinger's amusement at this request.
The ancient artifact had been designed by beings who understood that some threats could not be negotiated with, only eliminated. The Void Syndicate had proven their nature through centuries of destruction.
Allowing them to escape would only endanger other innocent civilizations.
But the choice was not the Harbinger's to make. The architects had built their Guardian system with a crucial limitation: it could only act through a partner from a younger species. The final decision rested with Marcus.
What are you thinking? Dr. Thessarian asked, noting the expression on his face. Marcus considered the options. The Harvester fleet represented thousands of beings, many of whom might be slaves or conscripts forced into service.
But they also represented an ongoing threat to millions of others. The mathematics were brutally simple: allowing the raiders to escape would result in more death and suffering than stopping them here. They'd had their chances to choose a different path, Marcus said finally.
How many worlds have they destroyed? How many civilizations have they enslaved?
According to Galactic crime databases, Dr. Vex said, consulting his scanners, the Void Syndicate is responsible for over 300 planetary genocides and the enslavement of approximately 50 billion sentient beings. Marcus felt the weight of that number settle in his chest. 50 billion lives destroyed or ruined by the raiders surrounding the station. And those were just the confirmed casualties, the actual number was probably much higher. Chen, Commander Voss said urgently, whatever you're planning to do, the other ships are powering weapons. They're preparing for a final assault. Through his connection with the Harbinger, Marcus could feel the raiders' desperation. They had recognized the artifact for what it was, a threat to their entire way of life. If news of the Harbinger's awakening spread through the galaxy, it would mean the end of their predatory civilization. The lead harvester ship fired first, its quantum disruptors striking the ancient artifact with enough force to vaporize a moon. The energy simply absorbed into the Harbinger's hull, adding to its already overwhelming power reserves. That was a mistake, Marcus said, and reached out through his connection to touch the artifact's weapon systems. The Harbinger's response was precise and overwhelming. Energy beams lanced out from its unfolded structure, striking each harvester ship with surgical accuracy. The raiders' stolen shields failed instantly, their hulls melting like ice in a furnace. Within seconds, the entire fleet was reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma. But the Harbinger wasn't finished. Marcus felt its attention turning to the data it had extracted from the raiders' computers in those final moments. Ship movements, base locations, supply routes, slave markets, everything needed to map the Void Syndicate's entire operation across 3 star systems. It's locating their other fleets, Marcus realized aloud. The Harbinger is tracking down every Syndicate ship in this sector of the galaxy. How many ships? Dr. Thessarian asked. Marcus consulted the stream of data flowing through his consciousness. Over 1,000. Maybe 1,500. They'd been building their strength for decades, preparing for a major expansion into civilized space. Commander Voss stared at him with her human eye while her cybernetic implant processed the implications. And the Harbinger can destroy them all? Yes, Marcus said simply. It can reach across interstellar distances. The Syndicate ships won't even see the attacks coming. But, even as he spoke, Marcus felt the Harbinger's consciousness pressing against his own, offering him a choice. The ancient system could eliminate the Void Syndicate entirely, ending their threat to the galaxy. But, doing so would require using Marcus as a conduit, channeling the artifact's power through his human nervous system. The process might kill him, or it might change him into something no longer entirely human. There's a risk, he admitted to his companions. Using the Harbinger at full power. I might not survive it. Dr. Thessarian's crystalline features shifted with concern. There must be another way. Some form of limited deployment that doesn't require such sacrifice. Marcus shook his head. The architects designed the Harbinger to be an absolute solution. Either we eliminate the threat completely, or we let it continue to grow. Half measures just postpone the inevitable conflict. He could feel the ancient artifact waiting for his decision, patient as only immortal beings could be. The Harbinger had power beyond imagination, but it needed human will to direct that power. It needed someone who understood not just the technical aspects of the system, but the moral weight of the choices it enabled. The slaves, Dr. Vex said suddenly. If we destroy the Syndicate fleet, what happens to the beings they've captured? Marcus consulted the data flowing through his connection. The Harbinger can differentiate between raiders and captives. It can selectively target the ship systems, disabling them rather than destroying them entirely. The slaves would be freed. And the raiders themselves? Some would die when their ships are disabled. Others would be stranded on planets they've been using as bases. Without their fleet, they'd no longer pose a galactic threat. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than allowing the Syndicate to continue their expansion. Marcus felt the weight of 50 billion lives pressing against his consciousness, all the beings who had suffered and died at the hands of the raiders. This was his chance to prevent that suffering from spreading to others. Do it, Commander Voss said firmly. End this threat while we have the chance. Marcus nodded and opened himself fully to the Harbinger's power. Energy flooded through his nervous system, threatening to burn out his human brain with the sheer volume of information and capability it carried. He felt his consciousness expanding, touching systems across dozens of star systems, identifying threats and calculating responses within human precision. Through the artifact's senses, he could see syndicate ships scattered across 3 sectors of space. Some were conducting raids on helpless colonies. Others were transporting slaves to hidden markets. Still others were preparing for a massive assault on the core worlds, planning to enslave entire civilizations in a single coordinated strike. Marcus reached out through the Harbinger's weapons systems and began to act. Energy beams crossed interstellar distances in the space of heartbeats, striking syndicate ships with pinpoint accuracy. Some were destroyed outright when their stolen power cores overloaded. Others found their engines and weapons systems selectively disabled, leaving them stranded but alive. The process took less than an hour, but to Marcus it felt like centuries. He experienced every strike, every ship disabled, every raider eliminated or captured. When it was over, the Void Syndicate had ceased to exist as a galactic threat. Their 1,000-ship fleet was reduced to scattered survivors and disabled hulks drifting in empty space. Marcus collapsed to the fabrication bay floor, his connection to the Harbinger severed by the sheer exhaustion of channeling so much power. Dr. Thessarian caught him before he hit the deck, her crystalline hands surprisingly warm against his skin. "Is it over?" she asked. Marcus managed a weak nod. "The immediate threat is eliminated. The Syndicate is finished as an organized force." "And you?" Commander Voss asked. "Are you still, you?" Marcus considered the question. He felt different, certainly. The experience of touching an ancient alien consciousness had left its mark on his human mind. But the core of who he was, the maintenance worker who believed in fixing things rather than breaking them, that remained unchanged. "I'm still me," he said finally. "Just with a better understanding of what needs fixing." Through the fabrication bay windows, they could see the Harbinger beginning to fold back into its dormant configuration. The ancient artifact had completed its task, and now it would return to its long sleep until the galaxy needed its protection again. But Marcus knew that wouldn't be for a very long time. The Harbinger had chosen him as its partner, and that partnership came with responsibilities that would last for the rest of his life. He was no longer just a maintenance worker on a research station. He had become something new, the guardian of an ancient guardian, the human who could wake the galaxy's most powerful protector when the need arose. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. His grandfather had always said that the most important job in the world was fixing things that were broken. Now Marcus had the tools to fix problems on a galactic scale. And, somewhere in the depths of space, the Harbinger waited patiently for the next time it would be needed. 6 months after the destruction of the Void Syndicate, Marcus Chen stood in his expanded workshop aboard Kepler's Dream, surrounded by projects that would have been impossible before his connection with the Harbinger. The research station had been transformed from a quiet archaeological outpost into the galaxy's most important technological development center, and Marcus found himself at the heart of that transformation. The device he'd built to interface with the Harbinger sat on his workbench, no longer the mysterious alien artifact it had once seemed. Now he understood its purpose completely. It was a bridge between human ingenuity and architect technology, allowing him to access the ancient civilization's knowledge while maintaining his essential humanity. "The Proximan delegation has arrived," Dr. Thessarian announced, entering the workshop with her usual crystalline grace. "They're requesting a demonstration of the defensive grid modifications." Marcus nodded, setting down the fusion welder he'd been using to repair a quantum resonator. The past 6 months had brought a steady stream of visitors to Kepler's Dream, diplomats, scientists, military leaders, and representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. All of them wanted to understand how a human maintenance worker had succeeded where their greatest minds had failed. The truth was both simpler and more complex than they expected. Marcus hadn't succeeded because he was smarter or more capable than the alien scientists. He'd succeeded because he approached problems differently. Where others saw sophisticated technology that required sophisticated solutions, Marcus saw broken systems that needed practical fixes. "Are the Proximans ready for the full demonstration?" he asked. "Admiral ZYX seems eager to see what our primitive human engineering can accomplish," Dr. Thessarian said with a hint of amusement in her melodic voice. Marcus smiled and gathered his equipment. Admiral ZYX had been one of the most vocal critics of the Human Harbinger partnership, arguing that such powerful technology shouldn't be controlled by a species that still used basic tools and manual labor.
The Proximan leader had demanded proof that humans could responsibly manage architect systems.
They made their way to the station's new command center, a vast chamber that had been constructed around the Harbinger using a combination of human engineering and ancient architect principles. The artifact rested at the center of the room, its liquid metal surface flowing in gentle patterns that Marcus had learned to read like a diagnostic display. Admiral ZYX was waiting with his retinue of advisors, their silver skin gleaming under the chamber's artificial lighting. The Proximan leader was tall and elegant, with cybernetic enhancements that gave him access to quantum calculation capabilities far beyond normal biological limits.
Engineer Chen, Admiral ZYX said with formal politeness that didn't quite hide his skepticism.
We are here to observe your defensive modifications. I confess I am curious to see how human methodology can improve upon architect technology.
The improvements aren't to the architect technology, Marcus explained, activating his interface device. They're to how we use it.
He placed his hands on the device and felt the familiar surge of connection with the Harbinger. The ancient artifact responded to his touch, its consciousness touching his own with the patient wisdom of eons. Through their bond, Marcus could access systems and capabilities that the original builders had designed for beings far more advanced than current galactic civilizations. But the architects had also understood something that many current species had forgotten: technology was only as good as the beings who used it. The most sophisticated weapon system in the universe was useless if no one could figure out how to operate it effectively. Harbinger, show our guests the current defensive grid status, Marcus said aloud. Holographic displays materialized throughout the command center, showing the tactical situation in the surrounding star systems. Kepler's dream was no longer alone in its sector of space. The station was now protected by a network of automated defense platforms, each one built using a combination of human engineering principles and architect technology.
Impressive, Admiral ZYX admitted, studying the displays.
Your defensive coverage extends across 3 star systems.
But I fail to see how this represents an improvement over standard architect deployment patterns.
Marcus smiled and activated the next phase of the demonstration. Harbinger, simulate a hostile fleet approaching from the Rigel sector.
Standard Void Syndicate tactics and equipment. The holographic display shifted to show a fleet of 30 enemy ships entering the outer system.
They moved in the aggressive formation that had made the Syndicate so dangerous, designed to overwhelm defenses through concentrated firepower and superior numbers. Now watch how the system responds, Marcus said. The defensive grid activated, but not in the way that traditional military doctrine would have suggested. Instead of meeting the enemy fleet head-on, the automated platforms began working together in complex patterns that seemed almost organic. Some platforms provided covering fire while others repositioned. Still others focused on disrupting enemy communications and navigation systems. The platforms are coordinating independently, one of Admiral ZYX's advisors observed. They're adapting to enemy tactics in real time.
That's the human contribution, Marcus explained.
Architect technology is incredibly powerful, but it was designed for perfect beings operating under perfect conditions.
Humans are specialists at making things work when conditions are imperfect.
The simulated battle continued, with the enemy fleet finding itself outmaneuvered at every turn. The defensive platforms didn't just destroy the attacking ships, they disabled them, captured their crews, and even rescued slave populations that might have been aboard the vessels.
Fascinating, Admiral ZYX said, his cybernetic enhancements processing the tactical data.
Your system prioritizes capture over destruction, preservation over elimination.
Most defensive networks are designed simply to destroy threats as efficiently as possible.
Most defensive networks are designed by people who've never had to fix the things they break, Marcus replied. Every destroyed ship represents resources that could have been put to better use. Every dead enemy is someone who might have been redeemed given the chance. It was a philosophy that had taken him months to explain to the various military leaders who visited the station. Human approaches to conflict were often seen as naive or inefficient by species that had mastered warfare on an interstellar scale. But Marcus had learned that the architects themselves had eventually come to similar conclusions. The original builders of the Harbinger understood that the goal of any defensive system should be to eliminate threats while preserving as much life and resources as possible, he continued. They built these capabilities into their technology, but most species who've encountered architect systems have been too focused on the raw power to notice the subtler features. Admiral ZYX studied the tactical displays for several more minutes, his cybernetic implants running probability calculations and strategic assessments. Finally, he nodded slowly. I begin to understand, he said. Your species' approach to technology, this focus on repair and maintenance rather than replacement and upgrade, allows you to see aspects of architect systems that others miss. It's not that we're better engineers, Marcus said. We're just used to working with what we have instead of what we wish we had. Dr. Thessarian stepped forward with a datapad in her crystalline hands. The results speak for themselves, Admiral. Since the defensive grid came online, we've had 17 separate encounters with hostile forces. Casualty rates are down 93% compared to traditional engagement protocols. Resource recovery is up by over 200%. And the psychological impact on our enemies? Significant, Dr. Thessarian replied. Word has spread through the criminal networks that attacking a human-protected system results not in glorious battle, but in capture, rehabilitation, and eventual integration into productive society. Most raiders are now actively avoiding our territory. Admiral ZYX's silver features shifted into what might have been a smile. Peace through superior maintenance protocols. I admit, it's not what I expected when I came here. Marcus deactivated the demonstration and felt his connection with the Harbinger fade back to its normal baseline level. The ancient artifact pulsed once in acknowledgement before returning to its patient monitoring of local space. There's something else we want to show you, Marcus said, leading the group to a secondary display. The Harbinger has been teaching us about other architect installations scattered throughout the galaxy. Most of them are dormant, like this one was, but they could be reactivated if necessary. The display showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with dozens of points highlighted in soft blue light. Each point represented another guardian system, another sleeping weapon that could be awakened in times of crisis. A defensive network spanning the entire galaxy, Admiral ZYX breathed. The implications are staggering. The architects built these systems to protect younger civilizations from threats they couldn't handle alone, Marcus explained. But they also built in safeguards to prevent the systems from being misused. Each installation requires a partner from a species that understands the value of preservation over destruction. And humans are the only species that meets these criteria? Marcus shook his head. Humans are the first species to activate the safeguards successfully. But the Harbinger has been evaluating other civilizations as well. The Zephyrians show promise, as do several species in the Outer Rim territories. The key isn't technological sophistication, it's philosophical compatibility with the architect's original intentions. Admiral ZYX was quiet for a long moment, his cybernetic implants processing the full scope of what Marcus was describing. Finally, he turned to face the human engineer directly. Engineer Chen, I came here expecting to find a dangerous primitive who had stumbled onto power beyond his understanding. Instead, I find someone who may represent the future of galactic civilization. I'm just a maintenance worker who got lucky, Marcus said with genuine modesty. No, Admiral ZYX replied firmly. You're proof that sometimes the most advanced solution is also the simplest one. Your species' approach to technology, this focus on making things work rather than making them impressive, may be exactly what the galaxy needs. As the Proximan delegation departed, Marcus returned to his workshop and the projects that filled his days. The quantum resonator needed calibration. The new fabrication systems required maintenance protocols. The defensive grid platforms needed regular inspection and repair. It was work that would have been familiar to his grandfather, despite the exotic technologies involved. The tools might be more sophisticated, but the basic principles remained the same: understand how things work, fix what's broken, and take care of the systems that take care of you. Through the workshop's window, Marcus could see the Harbinger resting peacefully in its chamber, its ancient consciousness content to wait for the next time it would be needed. And, across the galaxy, other Guardian systems were beginning to stir, responding to signals that hadn't been sent in millions of years. The age of the architects was over, but their legacy lived on in the hands of species that understood the true purpose of technology, not to dominate or destroy, but to preserve and protect the precious gift of life itself. Marcus picked up his welding torch and smiled. There was still plenty of work to do, and he wouldn't have it any other way. After all, someone had to keep the galaxy running, and humans had always been good at fixing things that everyone else thought were broken beyond repair. The Harbinger pulsed once in agreement, and Marcus got back to work.